Welcome to another episode of Hidden in Plain Sight. This will be the first episode in the series entitled The Black Nobility Family. There is so much information that has not been made available to the general public about the real and the true royal families, the real Illuminati, the original Vatican priesthood, the Europeans being the first slaves, the original empires of China, the original Charter of London, the first United Nations, the truth about extraterrestrials, and the list goes on and on. The original Charter of London, as you may well know, is governed by the Illuminati, or the private banking dynasties of 13, the so-called royal families. But the truth of the matter is, the original charter was granted by members of our noble families, who in fact are the Black noble Shriners, that enslaved Europeans prior to Europeans enslaving Black people. The term slave, or Slavic, was a term used to describe Indo-European slaves of the Black nobles. Indo-Europeans were the first Slavs. Slaves are Slavonics, not Black people. Most people think the Black people were the first slaves, but of course, they were not. Europeans want you to believe that all Black people are descendants of slaves. We all came from Africa on slave ships in 1555, and all civilizations began in Africa. However, this is not true, because Black people were the first people everywhere on the planet Earth, not just in what they call Africa, the original Fertile Crescent, of which is said to be the origin of all life on this planet. It ran from what is now known as North America, on the coast of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, down through what is known as Africa, into Mesopotamia, or what is known as the Middle East. It also connected to what is known as Mu and Numeria, which runs underneath the oceans into China and Japan. This is further validation that we did not all come from Africa, because most of the indigenous peoples of South America and in the Pacific will tell you that their ancestors came from Mu, Atlantis, or Lemuria, and not Africa. However, the Maroons in South America will tell you that they were slaves brought from Africa. Some of the Olmecs came from Africa, but others came from Mu, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mars, and the 19th galaxy called Sirius, or Septu. What most people fail to understand is that more than 250,000 years ago, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida was the northern part of what is known as Africa today. In fact, what is known as Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina was a part of Egypt at one time. Wahani, the territories, the Golden City, in Egypt of the West, has become common household names for these territories and locations by the true indigenous peoples of these lands. North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama were also a part of the Olmec lands, known as Alta, and later became known as Atlan. This further confirms that we are not all from Africa, but are indigenous to these lands as well. Even in Mesopotamia, you have periods, pyramids, and civilizations that predate those in Africa. So we could not all have come from just one location on the planet Earth. We were everywhere. And we did not all come from Africa, because there are plenty of pyramids and mounds on the coast of Georgia and South Carolina that predate the pyramids in Egypt. Most scholars think that Egypt was the first of the great empires, but not Booty. The reality of it is Egypt, or Kemet, was the last of the great kingdoms. In fact, the 18 dynasties of Egyptian or Cometian history made public today is only the last of the great empires, which were built by indigenous black nobles, or Aswad, Nanya, Netret At, Wa Netorat. Other than the original Mayan and Aztec empire. The Egyptian empire came out of the Kish empire of the Noban, which was an Olmec empire in Aswan, Sudan, or Ta Nahishi. This empire originally consisted of Ethiopia, Sudan, Nubia, Uganda, and Kenya, long before the existence of the Egyptian empire. In fact, the people who began the Egyptian empire were not born in Egypt, but rather Noba, Sunu, Ethiopia, or what is called Nubia today. They migrated to the desert in Egypt and began building. However, the original people were born in Nuba, now called Nubia. Others were born in what they call Asia and Mesopotamia today, and not Egypt or Kemet. Some even came from the Sahara Desert, of which some historians say the Olmecs originated. This is why Mu, Lemuria, Atlantis, and the underground is such a mystery to them, because they are only dealing with these subjects on the surface. If humanoid female skeletal remains were found in Ethiopia, which have been dated 4.4 and 3.2 million years ago, called Ardi and Lucy, then you already know that women are much older than the Bible claims, and we are much older than people want to believe. None of these were apes, nor did they crawl on all fours. They all stood up straight and were Negroid women. Now, in the year 2000 AD, French and Kenyan scientists found what they are calling the Millennium Man, which they say date back to 1.5 million years ago in Tugen Hills of Kenya. However, one of the paleontologists by the name of Martin Peckford stated that it is at least 6 million years old, which further validates that we are much older than what these people want us to believe. Another finding of 3.5 million year old skull was found in Kenya, Africa, along the shores of Lake Turkana in the 1998 through 99 AD by researchers from the National Museum of Kenya. By the way, all of these findings were of female Negroids, or black women, not men. Hence, this is more of her story and not his story, according to many of their scientists. The height of these women coincide with the height of the Nuban, Hahati, the Pygmy, or the Twa people. Others think that Kemet was the original name of Egypt, and Kemet, or Kemet, was the first. However, this is not true either. The original name for Egypt was Tama Re, meaning land of Red. Then it was called Tar, and latter Kemet, Mitzrayim, and finally Egypt. The original names for what is now referred to as Upper and Lower Egypt was Uazit and Nekhebit, which were both ruled by King Narmer or Menes, whose family was from the Naisi, Aswan, Nubia, and Mesopotamia, not Egypt. The merging of Uazit and Nekhebit by way of Moloch, Menes, is what brought about the Egyptian dynasties. Most scholars don't even know that the original rulers of the Egyptian empire were not from Egypt, but rather migrated to Egypt and became rulers. According to the Europeans, Osiris, also known as Asaru, and Isis, Aset, were first mentioned in the 4th dynasty, and the oldest record date they have for them is 2500 BC. My reason for saying this is because most people like to begin the Egyptian empire with Asaru, Aset, and Heru. Then others like to go back a little bit further to Ma'at in the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom, which they have dated around 2780 to 2250 BCE. However, they have Tehuti or Tha on record as being in Teotihuacan or Central America with the Olmecs around 3100 BC. And there are records indicating in the Olmec writings that Tehuti was exiled from Egypt, and he came to the city of the gods in Mexico, the city of the gods in Teotihuacan is where all the gods would come to meet, and it was also where men would go to become gods. Olmec Empire, Misi, is also recorded in the Papu Vo of the Mayans as being the Central America circa 3113 BC, which leaves another problem for the Europeans in accurate dates and timelines. Even the long count calendar, dated August 13, 3113 BC, by Goodman Martinez Thompson, was found at the Olmec Iztapal in the Veracruz state, which proves that the Olmecs birthed the Mesoamerican calendar system, and they were already here long before 1500 BC. This means that if any of these dates are remotely close to being accurate, then just the migrations alone of the Olmecs, not the existence of them, are older than the existence of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Ma'at, according to their dates. Now, think about the dates of which they have given and what all of this really means according to their own dates. Kemet, the son of Ut-Nafisin, or Noah, was not born in Egypt, but migrated to Egypt from the Nuban Olmec Empire in Nuba. His father, however, was from what they call Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq. The Olmec lineage and bloodline has also been traced back to the Utsumatism, or Noah, in Mesopotamia. Moloch Narmer, or King Narmer, also known as Menes, the founder of the very first dynasty of Egypt. Family was from what is now called Ethiopia, or Mesopotamia, not Egypt, not Canaan, or the four supreme grand hierophants, or masters of Tamara, also known as Egypt. was also from Ta Nehisa, or Nubia, and he was given the script of the chemical chart for the DNA strands and the mitochondria. In Nubia, he was known as Dedun, the fashioner, and was responsible for the procreation of humans in the image and likes of the gods. The creation story in the book of Genesis about God creating man from the earth and breathing the breath of life into his nostrils came by way of Dedun, or Kanum, of Nubia, who migrated into Egypt. His wife, Anukis, was from the Ta Nahesi Sudan, as well as his daughter, Satis, which later became one of his wives, was also from Aswan, Sudan. There has been much confusion about the subject of the Egyptians, Olmecs, and Sumerians, and I trust that this will bring closure to the massive confusion by the scholars of today. The Kish Empire, which later became the Kush, or Kushite Empire, was created by the Nubans, which later became known as the Olmecs. Kish was one of the initial 14 kingdoms set up by the Olmecs in Ganawa, or what is now known as Africa and Mesopotamia. The original name for what is being called Africa today was Ganan el Nuba, or simply Ganawa, referred to El Katab Shul el Mawat by Amunbi Rahata. Most people think that Africa, or Africa, was the original name from Emperor Tyrus Afrik of the Qing Empire more than 15,000 years ago. But it wasn't. The word Africa came by way of the Arabic word for Afrikaya, or Ifrikaya, which means to divide or separate, because the land that is now called from what is called America today, Africa, had begun to separate or divide from what is called America today. The land of Africa is now saturated by the same pale Arabs in Egypt and Morocco, who was responsible for calling it Afrikaya, or separated in the first place. There was no division in between Africa and America when the Olmecs migrated to the Americas, or when they set up Mu, Lemuria, and Atlan. The word Atlan came by way of the Olmecs from the word Alta, which means to vacate in Olmec or Kushi. They called North America Alta, which later became Atlan, and later became Atlas. They called South America Zin, Afmorican, and later Amic Exum. They called Central America Oman, or Alman, which means rubber land, and they called Africa Ganun el Nuba, or the land of gold, and the imperial city of gold, which later became 7 cities of gold in North America, called Cibola by Europeans. The movie National Treasure, Book of Secrets, reveals some of these facts. This is not history you can find in the history books, but only in the pyramids, hidden clay tablets underground, genetic memory, and dynamic observation of telepathic transmission. Many of the things that we speak of and know about was not recorded in history and was only communicated telepathically or face-to-face. Before anything was ever written down, you would have had to have been for a long time before the beginning to understand. The teachings are divinely orchestrated from the genetic and cellular level because I am a Olmec Nuban by blood and birthright, according to the author. These are the axioms prior to written communications, and the in and out formation alone should be self-evident. However, we are also still able to prove and substantiate any of our claims, historically, scientifically, and otherwise. Well, thank you for listening to the first episode of the Black Nobility family. A new episode will be done Mondays and Fridays. I hope you enjoy. Please subscribe if you like this content. Give the video a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you made it this far. And I'm very, very much so appreciative of your time. Bless you.